Welcome to the Homeschool Now USA podcast, where we talk to the most interesting people who are here to encourage you as a parent. This is your host, Robert Bortons, and today we have the author of the original self-help book, Life Lessons from Genesis, Brian Siegel. Thank you, Brian, for joining us today. And first of all, I just would love to hear a little bit about your family.
Oh, well, I've been married for 42 years. I have two sons. One is 42 and one is 40. I'm a grandfather 4 times. And, thank God, we seem to be settled and everyone is fine. So, that's kind of the story there. My oldest son has been with the Los Angeles Dodgers for 22 years, right out of college. And, they're in the playoffs, so we keep up with the ball scores by osmosis. Everyone is well, thank God, is well, doing well.
Awesome. Well, I really wanted to find out what inspired you to write this book.
Well, it's a very good question. I was completely unaware, and I think most people are, that accompanying the 5 books of Moses, or the Jewish Bible, there was a whole lot of additional information, a vast body that would dwarf the textual portion, and it's called the oral tradition. And many people are completely unaware of it. And initially, this data was going to be passed on verbally from a father to his son, to his family, and so forth. However, a large portion of it was written down after the Second Temple was destroyed, and the Jewish people were dispersed around the world. But now a lot of it is written down, and what it was communicated by God, by the Creator, to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and to Moses. So on Mount Sinai, God gave Moses some of this oral tradition, and most of it was given to Moses during the 40-year trek through the desert. And what this information does, it supplements the facts of the Jewish Bible and also provides life lessons, telling us principles that the Creator has espoused, has provided to us to guide us to have happy, refined, elevated lives. And much of this, as I said, is not on the face of the text of the Bible. There's allusions to most of it, but it needs to be expanded. So let me, if I could, give you one example. We know that Jacob worked for the hand of Leah. I'm sorry, for Rachel to be his wife.
Right.
And when we get to at the night of the marriage ceremony, Laban, or the father-in-law, switches wives on Jacob, and he goes through the ceremony and then finds that it was Leah that he married, which was possible because they were wearing veils. It was at night, and it could have been difficult to see.
Right.
But what the oral tradition tells us is that Rachel and Jacob were quite aware that Laban was the classic white-collar criminal. He was known for his duplicity and double dealing. He didn't take money with a gun, but he managed to gyp a lot of people. And they actually had signs whereby if Rachel and Jacob didn't give these signs to each other during the ceremony, Jacob would know that something is awry and would literally walk away. But when Rachel saw that her father was dressing Leah in the wedding gown and everything like that, she had a choice. She could have said to herself, well, okay, guys, take your best shot. We planned on this. And when Leah doesn't give Jacob the right signs, he'll just walk away, literally leave her at the altar. But Rachel couldn't do this. She was was too much sensitivity about seeing her sister humiliated in that fashion. So she actually gave the signs to Leah. And so Leah had the signs to give to Jacob to, in effect, fool him. And and Rachel took quite a chance, because some spouses would be pretty upset that you went along with a situation to fool me. However, so of course Jacob didn't. In fact, he married Rachel. He agreed to work another 7 years to marry Rachel. And all of the Jewish commentaries, this oral tradition, tells us that what we learn from this, a major lesson we should learn from this episode, is that one should not publicly embarrass another. And this is a crucial teaching. We're told that one should actually jump in a furnace rather than embarrass someone, and it's something that we're not aware of. I mean, criticizing a spouse, an employee, or someone like that in front of others is publicly embarrassing them. So if one would think about this, think about it daily, they would be more conscious of it and presumably avoid it. So anyway, so the Creator has given us these life lessons all throughout, the Bible, and it's important. And I found the reason personally why I wrote the book is I found that when I learned these guidelines, when I was exposed to them, I became a more sensitive, better individual. And I wanted to share this knowledge with people. I have a little bit of a academic bent. I've written books for law students and so forth.
Right.
And so that was the genesis, if you will, for this idea. And the people that have read it have told me it was very helpful to them. I think there's a number of reviews on Amazon, and so it exposes, and there's many of them. There's that could be talked about throughout. And so anyway, these are guidelines given us by the Creator to have more successful lives.
Yeah.
So that was it. Sharing that information, was the reason.
Good. Yeah. So, we often forget, we have printers and all that thing, but the printing press is relatively new, and the oral tradition of passing down information and knowledge was really how children learned. That's how we learn in homeschooling many ways, and it's just it's always great. I'm always excited to see and learn about these additional insights that might not always be, just exposed to, and just how, Genesis and the Bible, the inerrant Word of God, is always being backed up, and history is always, proving it right over and over and over again. So
that's right. That's right. Let me tell you just another good aspect about what was this oral tradition is parents sitting down and teaching their children. You form a bond in that way that unfortunately many people working today, come back from work very tired and don't really build up this camaraderie with their children.
Yeah, absolutely. Just tell me a little bit about what makes your book unique.
What makes my book unique is the fact is this book isn't Brian Siegel's thoughts about what makes people better or anything like that. The advice given is of divine origin, and that's a critical thing. So it's not just an opinion. Experiences. It's like basically having the ultimate life coach, if you will. Who knows more about humanity than the entity that created humanity?
Amen.
So, and it also shows that these principles are immutable. They're timeless, and So that's what I think is really unique about it. This isn't anyone's personal impressions. It's what the Creator has told us will lead to happier, more elevated, more refined lives. And people that become aware of these principles and how they are to be applied will see that. Well, almost anyone reading this book will say, I think, will say, gee, if I had done this instead of what I did do, things would have been better in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the book spends time on how to apply the principles, what they mean, rather than just stating them.
What speaking of these principles, can you tell us a little bit about these principles that you found?
Sure. Well, I mean, the very first one, it's a seminal concept, is what I call the attitude of gratitude. And someone who is of the Jewish religion anyway, that we're taught the first thing when we wake up is to thank God. I got up today. We shouldn't take that for granted. There was an anecdote is I know this gentleman who died about 5 years ago. He was 93, I think, when he died, and he was being wheeled around in a wheelchair. And when people would ask him, how's he doing, he would always say, well, any day I get up and I'm looking down at the grass rather than up at the grass is a good day for me. Yeah. So, we shouldn't take it for granted that we got up that morning, because there's a lot of people that didn't. Constant gratitude. I mean, spouses should thank each other for everything. If a child doesn't seem to appreciate the fact that his mother's making sandwiches for him each morning, she should remind him, and also the husband should remind the child, hey, do you realize how nice it is for mom to get up earlier and make these sandwiches for you? You have to even our employers, they're helping us make a livelihood. A lot of people have the attitude, gee, I'm being paid, I'm working to be paid. But no, thank God this person is there so that you can make a living. And this principle applies even to anyone, even to people who are paid to help us. And I'll give you an example. I swim often. I try to swim often at the YMCA, at a local YMCA, has a beautiful pool. And one of the guys I noticed would always, when he was finished swimming, walk up to the lifeguard and thank him for being there. And so one morning, typically it was in the morning, I went over to this person and I said, gee, it's nice that you thank the lifeguard, but isn't he being paid to do this? He said, yes, he is. However, if he didn't get up and answer the bell every morning, I couldn't swim, because, you can't swim unless there's lifeguards present. And, we need to realize that, and we should have the same attitude towards the male person, the police officer, the person who gives us coffee in the morning. We buy the coffee. We should say thank you. Yeah, they're being paid to do it, but nevertheless, if they didn't come to work, our lives would be a little less pleasant. And so it's something to keep in mind. One of the stories I tell in the book is this 83-year-old woman, this guy, who was one of her students, and she would spend a lot of extra time with students. He wrote her a letter because he got a job much later, and he thought, gee, this woman really helped me. This teacher really helped me. He found out where she lived. She was then 83 years old. He wrote her a letter, about a 6-sentence letter, he said, thanking her. And she wrote back to him. She says, you're the only one to ever thank me. I'm going to read this letter every single morning. And it really impacted on her that someone appreciated what she had done. So, it's an important point. Recently, I went to a dinner, and they were serving hors d'oeuvres before. And the guy came over, and I took an hors d'oeuvre. I said, thank you very much. He walked away about 3 feet, turned around, and said, you're the only one to thank me tonight for that. So it makes an impression. And again, if we don't show gratitude, people that are extending these things to us won't care about us. So it's something to always keep in mind, the importance of anyone who does anything for us. We should appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a great life lesson. I've heard in some societies they don't even have a word for thank you, but instead you tell other people what they did for you when they're there. So you say, instead of saying thank you, Brian, for helping me out, when you're there, you turn to a friend and said, Brian, he helped me do XYZ yesterday, and it was so helpful, and it really saved me. And so just recognizing, and this goes back to your first point earlier too, is recognize people in public, thank them, and then if you do have some issues with somebody, do that in private. That's not something that should be
exactly. One of the things about not publishing embarrassing, there's also a statement in the Jewish Bible that says, "Don't hate your brother in your heart." So what does that mean? Well, again, the oral tradition explains to us what this means is if you have a problem with someone, you should not be passive aggressive. You should talk to them about it, but it's very important, not just as you just said, not to do it in public. Try to get them one-on-one and say, gee, you said this, it hurt me, or, for this reason, I don't understand it for this reason. Could you explain it to me? And then you could have a dialogue, hopefully, and maybe improve yourself. And maybe there was some reason why you acted that way in that moment that the person wasn't aware of. So, it's a very good point. It is important. We're not saying, don't ask questions, but we're saying do it, like you said, on a one-on-one basis, so there's no public embarrassment to the person. But, people, again, kind of rebuke their employees or whatever, or even their spouses. I mean, just saying something like, my wife left the key in the car, and we had to get AAA and blah blah blah. And that's embarrassing. It shows people don't realize it could be embarrassing. It's not funny. It's embarrassing because you're basically saying that your spouse was inattentive.
Right.
So we really need to think about these things. And again, it makes a lot of sense when one thinks it through, but it's they've got to focus on it and recognize that.
Right. Well, that's why I really enjoyed your book. Was it's real approachable. It's a little bit over 50 pages, and just a lot of meat in it, and very very easy to read and understand. So that was one of the things that I really enjoyed, and I think that the people that pick up your book will really enjoy as well. So what are
thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What are some of the other principles that people can learn about?
Absolutely, everything. So again, there's so much, and one really and needs to think about these concepts. You mentioned gratitude. Someone they might say, "Oh, well, I'm grateful," but are they? So it's things you have to think about, and and again, this biblical backup is often much stronger and more precise than the words. Like it says, don't steal anything. But by biblical standards, we're not just talking about grabbing something off a shelf and running out of a store. We're talking about frankly, an employee is stealing when he or she surfs the internet, while they're at work, or comes late, leaves early, puts their personal mail in the inbox to be stamped and mailed. Now, again, this is not, catastrophic, it would seem, but one doesn't want to get on a slippery slope. Another thing that we're told these days is, as a matter of fact, some stores have reversed their policy about buying an item with the intent to return it after the event.
Right.
Going into and it's really wrong. And another thing that a lot of people might not think of is parking in a parking lot marked for particular stores. Well, maybe someone who wants to use one of those stores will say, "Gee, there's no parking. Go somewhere else." And you without intending to, you've cost one of those storefronts a sale. So we have to think about these things. Another principle, I have time, is the importance of being humble. And just I think it was yesterday or Wednesday, the Wall Street Journal had an article saying that the more successful bosses or superiors are people that are humble, not the guys that scream out all the time. And frankly, we learned that. We learn humility from Genesis when God tells Jacob to leave his father-in-law Laban. What does Jacob do at that time? He calls in his wives. He calls in Rachel and Leah. He meets them in the field because wolves have ears. And he says to them, it's very interesting. If someone reads what he says to them, your dad has been looking at me kind of ominously lately. He's trying to change the deal on me 100 times. And God has told me to leave now. And how do they answer? They're of equal status. They answer, you're right. He never gave us a dowry. He doesn't treat us like children. And you should do what God told you to do. So I ask in the book, what's wrong with this picture? If you get a direct command from the Creator, shouldn't you lead with that?
Yeah.
Isn't that, end of story? Why are you giving some practical reasons too? And giving the practical reasons first? And the answer is humility. Even though he was only talking with his wives, they were, they realized what was going on too. Still, he played it down. He played the fact that God had given him the direct command down. And that's humility. And then, and talking about humility. Do I have time for a lawyer joke with humility?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So this guy has a date, and the date says, "Gee, my roommate hasn't gone out for quite a while. Do you have a friend that could take her out too? We'll double date." So the guy says, "Yeah, he has a friend who's a lawyer." They go on the date, and this lawyer is just doing all the talking. He says, "I like this, and I didn't do this, and I didn't do this for this reason, and this happened to me." And finally, the lawyer looks up, and he sees that everyone is kind of looking into space. So he says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I've been talking about myself all night. I'll be quiet now, and you people can tell me what you like about me." So, anyway, not exactly humble, and probably won't be asked out for another double date.
No, that's good.
Anyway.
You talked a little bit about stealing, and that's, of course, one of the 10 Commandments. So why aren't these principles and guides enumerated like the 10 Commandments?
Okay, very good question. We are told the reason is, and first, number one, there's much more to the 10 Commandments that are on the face of those things. It says don't kill, but if someone's coming to kill you, you can preempt them. But I mean, the main reason is the principle in space is not as significant. It doesn't give the lasting impression as a narrative. So by putting these principles into stories, it should help people remember them and gives them an actual application of that principle. So having it in, again, in a story, something one can relate to, probably makes it easier to remember, easier to recall. And again, this was the whole idea of the oral tradition among disseminating knowledge was also for the father-son relationship to be built up. You know what I mean? Again, when you're learning with someone verbally and everything, it should help form a bond, a lasting bond.
Oh yeah, that's a great point, and that's what, going back to home education, something that is doable with families is passing on and building up those family oral traditions, as well as, that bonding between father and son, mother and daughter, mother and son, father and daughter, and something that is done really intentionally in homeschooling as well. Well, it sounds
Well,
like...
I think that's very important, given with what people are learning from the media and unfortunately in many schools and colleges.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want my listeners to know the name of the book and where to get it. So,
okay, it's called. My name is Brian Siegel, Siegel, and the name of the book is The Original Self-Help Book: Life Lessons from Genesis, and it's on Amazon. You can order it. You can read a bit of it before you buy it, if you decide to buy it. And there are also a number of reviews there, and thank God the reviews have been very favorable. And people like the idea of learning about these principles and also seeing the application, the modern day application. So the fact that these principles, emanate from 3,000 years ago or so, they're still very applicable today, and that's important for people to realize. It's because someone might say, well, this was said 3,000 years ago, 3,300 years ago. What is it? How can it have relevance today? Well, it certainly does.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm reading Genesis right now with my wife, and so we're just been going through that at the moment. So, yeah, I encourage everyone to go to Amazon.com and pick up the original self-help book, Life Lessons from Genesis. And Brian, thank you for spending some time with us today. And I guess go Dodgers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Robert. I very much appreciated the